Okay, so this is our part two video, our interview with Robyn from the CDC. And when we left off, we were going to we got kind of off track, but we were going to talk about how Ebola gets spread. And somebody had asked a question about why is it mostly spread through fluids? And I explained to Robyn after the video recording ended that we were doing a unit on cells. And that was why we were talking about disease so much. So she was going to explain that aspect of Ebola and why it affects the body the way it does. Right?
Yes. So I actually, since I don't normally work on Ebola, it's actually a pretty difficult question. And I asked one of my friends that had worked on Ebola, and he gave me a one-page explanation. So this is pretty much the watered-down version of why it's mainly spread by fluids. And his description was Ebola tends to infect cells that are associated with fluids. An example of that would be the cells that line the blood vessels. So that would sort of explain if you're having the virus infect blood vessel lining, why you would get hemorrhage, because it would destroy those the vessels, and then people would bleed out. Another cell type it infects, which is seen in the blood, is white blood cells. So it will infect or white blood cells. And then those cells get taken back to the lymph nodes, and normally in the immune system, that's where you want the pathogen to go to, because then the immune system can fight the disease. But because Ebola is so infectious, this actually ends up being bad for the person, but good for the virus, because it's taken directly back to the lymph nodes where there's other white blood cells that it can infect, and then the disease spreads more. So I don't know, was that a good enough explanation?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
And then somebody else asked a question about the infrastructure in West Africa. Yeah.
Yeah, this kind of ties into why there's been such a problem with the disease spreading, is because there is a lack of lack of resources that we're used to here. You don't have regular electricity. There's not, phone lines everywhere. There's not running water. So in all the places, like in Monrovia, the big city, there's electricity in places, but that's only because they have generators. So unless you have a working generator and can afford gas, you're not going to have electricity. So most people in Liberia don't have electricity. They don't have running water. You have to walk however far to get to a well to get water. And so that makes it more difficult to have, sanitary conditions, to wash your hands, which is one of the big things for fighting Ebola, is to be able to wash your hands, so that, if let's say you touch a person that has Ebola and then you touch your face, you're going to spread it because you can't wash your hands. And then it's a lot of places there's no cell phone coverage. They only had I think before Ebola, they only had 2 or 3 ambulances for the entire country of Liberia. So there's been a lot of money donated to try and get vehicles there. And the thing too is there's not many paved roads in most of Liberia. It's going to be no roads, or really bad roads that you have to have 4-wheel drive, and even then you still might get stuck. So yeah, conditions are pretty bad there.
And you were telling me a story about how, you go some of the remote villages, that one guy who you said how he had to fashion some sort of.
Yeah, this one guy who was really trying to do what he could for their village to help fight Ebola. He went to a village, walked 2 hours to a village nearby to get information on Ebola, saw that they had the just like a container you would have at a picnic with water or lemonade in it with the spigot, that's what they use, which you probably saw photos of my blog, for making dilute bleach solutions for washing your hands. And you'll see these all over Liberia. They have checkpoints with them before you go into buildings. It's just making sure your hands are clean. So he didn't have one of those, so he improvised, and he got a piece of bamboo and put it in the ground, and then filled that up with dilute bleach, and then took a stick through the side. So when you want to wash your hands, you pull out the stick, dilute bleach comes out, and you wash your hands. So some pretty creative people out there.
Yeah. And then related to that aspect, we were kind of talking about what it was. Well, I was explaining to Robyn that one of the first diseases we talked about was the plague. They also learned about the plague in history when they learn about the medieval times. And so I was explaining how we talked about the outbreak in Chinatown and how in the 1800s and how they were treated with the quarantine and all these, some slums were burned down, and how we talked about in class that when there's a lack of knowledge, a lot of times fear, can overcome, and people do the best they can, but that's part of the reasons why understanding about science and being educated about disease is so important. And so Robyn started telling me some stories about what was happening in Liberia, and I think you were talking about Sierra Leone also.
Yeah, I mean, when Ebola first started, and actually still in places where they haven't had it, there is a lot of fear. Initially, people they don't believe Ebola is real, and that's why you see a lot of these signs that say Ebola is real. Those were put out because people didn't believe that Ebola was a disease. They actually thought it was something that all the foreigners made up, or even brought the disease and infected them with it. So that was part of the education of people, to make them understand, like, Ebola is real, this is how it spread. And people wouldn't listen initially, but once a lot of their family members ended up dying, they would start to believe it more so. And that's when they were hiding cases and were lying about who was in contact. So there was that aspect of it. But then also with people dying of Ebola, they will shun, they'll shun people who get sick. They will shun family members. People come back from having Ebola to their village. Some places they're not allowed to come back. Their house has been looted or it's been burned. With that aspect, I mean, there is a combination of fear sometimes that is not necessary. But, if somebody was in a house that had Ebola and the house has not been decontaminated,
Yeah,
you actually don't really want to go in there. So in some cases, the fear is
valid.
Probably good.
Yeah. But also you were telling me about that one colleague and the two little boys who had been orphaned, right?
Yeah.
And that there's actually a lot of kids who've been orphaned, and you were saying how, like, kids are being brought in, but then some of them actually do have Ebola. And
yeah, I mean, well, there was those two kids that didn't have anywhere to go. They both ended up actually dying of Ebola. They found the dad, and he was helping take care of one of them before he died. And the dad ended up living.
Wow.
But I think there were some links that I put on my blog about the nurses taking care of a baby when the mom died, and then all of the nurses ended up getting Ebola from the baby. The baby initially tested positive, but ended up having Ebola. So all of the nurses.
You mean tested negative?
Tested negative, but then ended up having Ebola. So all of the nurses got Ebola.
Wow.
So it's kind of been a shift where
you make the assumption that they have it until
people won't take care of the baby.
Yeah.
If a parent dies. Oh, that's one. Sorry, getting back to one of the things you were talking about, Sierra Leone and the fear and quarantine. To help stop the spread of Ebola in Sierra Leone, because it's so bad right now. At Christmas time, people weren't allowed to leave their homes and travel around, which, it's a very big deal. Just like here, Christmas is a very big deal, and people go to see their families. But because of Ebola, people weren't allowed to travel in Sierra Leone.
And you said that Sierra Leone is probably one of the worst places right now, right?
It is the worst place. Liberia it started in Guinea, and then it went to Liberia. So Liberia spiked and has come down. And Sierra Leone is still up high. I think they're getting about 300 new cases a week. So they're really bad still.
And that's where you're going to go back to?
That's where I would be going, yeah. But there was concern in Liberia because cases have come down and people are becoming more complacent, and they just had an election which allowed for people to gather in places, and then there was no ban on people traveling for Christmas. I think there's a little concern in these next few weeks after Christmas there could be another uptick in cases. So we still haven't seen it yet, but I don't know if it'll happen.
And if you go, is it if you go back or when you go back? Are you
when I'm back?
So when are you scheduled to go?
I'm supposedly on the team to go February 21st to Sierra Leone in the lab there.
And one of the things that you had talked about on your most recent blog post, we have about 5 more minutes, was how hard it's been since you've come back. Do you want to share a little bit of that?
It's better now, but I think it's when you're there and you're working hard, you don't really have time to think about everything that's happening and how sad it really is. But I think for a lot of people, once you come back, you just start realizing like how awful and devastating it is for those countries and those people, and you just feel helpless that you didn't do more. And it's just sad when so many people are dying and people.
Does, does it make you feel like, just give you perspective on your life? And the things that we consider, like I say that stuff to my kids all the time when,
Yeah.
a shoelace breaks or something. Like, this is not the end of the world. Have some.
Yeah. I mean, and then also, like, I'm sad about what I saw, but then, what about the healthcare workers that see worse? And do I have a right to be sad when they're seeing so much worse? And then what about the people that actually live there that are living it, and that's their reality, and they don't get to go somewhere else? Like, I get to come home to my regular life, and,
And yet you still want to go back.
Well, yeah, it's hard, but you still want to go back because you want to stop. I want to stop the outbreak. So that's why you go back, even though it's hard. Because it's harder for the people that live there.
And what's the next step? I thought you mentioned something like, are they trying to develop a vaccine, or is there any kind of testing going on or anything like that?
I think the vaccine will probably stop this outbreak. It might stop it from becoming endemic, but I mean, the biggest thing is stopping, like, finding who's sick and stopping their spread to other cases. So case contact tracing is probably the most important thing. Like,
yeah.
If I had it, and who was I in contact, and making sure those people don't spread it if they end up getting sick.
Yeah.
But with so many people that have it and so many people in contact, it's impossible.
Yeah. And then there's the cultural barriers, the language barriers, all those other, yeah. And the fact that we're all coming in, and yeah. Besides CDC US, were there other countries like, people?
Oh, yeah.
Who did you see people from? Like,
I mean, it's a lot of agencies there. I mean, the UN's there,
okay.
which is all kinds of countries.
Yeah.
MSF, Doctors Without Borders, and they have
good.
people from all over.
Okay.
USAID, which is U.S. government. The Army, U.S. Army, Marines, Navy.
There's a lot of people chipping in.
WHO.
World Health.
I don't know if I said that already. Samaritan's Purse, which you heard about. Those are the doctor that got Ebola was from Samaritan's Purse. I mean, there's just I can't even name it. I heard so many initials for agencies that I don't even know what they all are.
Yeah, but it's good to know that there's a lot of people jumping in, but we need to keep somewhat of a understanding that it's not over, and a lot of people are still over there. Okay, so we got about another minute. I just wanted to say thank you.
No problem.
And it's always fun to see you. And I'm going to tell the kids that I have most of those questions, the answers you sent me via email, and I'm going to post those if they want to read them. But if they have any additional questions, I'll have them send them to me, and I can forward them to you.
Yeah. And if you still wanted to do like a live Skype too, like a after school extra thing.
Yeah. I was thinking we could try to do a Google Hangout or something like that, where it's like a room where everybody kind of gathers and then they can ask questions. But I got to figure that out first, like I did this.
Okay. I leave town on January 22nd.
Okay.
So
well, let me stop the recording and then we'll move on. But I just wanted to say thank you again.
No problem.
And I'm proud to call you my friend.